Hey guys, coming to you from Gwinnett County Public Library, the Five Forks branch, and I'd just like to welcome everybody to Cooking with Chef Jeff, a GCPL culinary series. Today, I'm going to teach you a little bit about making homemade pasta, okay? And also a lovely recipe to go along with it. Now, so many people get so worried about making pasta because they think it's something only you can do in a restaurant or whatever it may be. But I'm going to show you how to make it easy and dispel some of the myths around it. So it can be something you can do for, a nice date night or maybe just a dinner with friends. So I guess it's time to get to it. Let's have fun. Now, the first thing that we need to do in making pasta is obviously make pasta. So not only do you need to make the dough, but it needs to rest for about 30 minutes before you cut it up or shape it into whatever form you want. And that is pretty important because that's going to give the flour enough time to absorb all of the moisture and to really become a nice dough. What we have here today is obviously some all-purpose flour, as well as we have some lovely cage-free eggs and egg yolks. The fact that they're cage-free is really nice because they're very, very bright yellow. So when we get to our dough, it's going to be a very rich dough, all right? Now, you've probably seen videos of somebody making pasta, in a little well on a cutting board with, a bunch of flour around it. And that's one of the things that I think scares people a little bit. But you can just as easily do this same exact recipe in a food processor with the metal blade or in a mixer, okay? Yeah, there are going to be very small differences between doing it by hand and a mixer, yeah, but just getting across the finish line of making homemade pasta, I think, is the first thing that we should aim for. We're just going to add our pasta as well as our eggs to our mixer. Okay, and you can see some of these egg yolks are almost orange. They're so dark. It's quite beautiful. Just going to turn it on low speed. I'm not going to mix this pasta all the way until the dough forms. I'm going to let it come together, and then I'll take it out and knead it by hand for a little bit, just to make sure I get a good balance and good mixture. Let's scrape down the side of our bowl a little bit here. Now, when you're making pasta, almost every recipe you'll see, it calls for a lot of egg yolks. And one of the reasons behind that is, well, the two main reasons are going to be the color as well as the texture. The egg yolk has a lot more fat in it, so it lends to a much smoother, much shinier dough. There we go, this should be good. And when you get done with those egg yolks, or when you separate the egg whites from the egg yolks, you don't necessarily have to get rid of them or throw them away. You can make, do something like a meringue or make a angel food cake or chiffon cake. There's plenty of things you can do with baking to use up those egg whites that are left over. All right. You can see this is already starting to form up into a nice dough. Now, whenever you're working with pasta, just like breads or cakes, you always want to make sure you turn it out onto a floured surface. And that's just so it doesn't stick to everything and become a mess. Dough is really coming together nicely. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to take a little bit of the flour that I reserved. Just going to put it down right here. And we're just going to knead this and work this until it's a nice, well-mixed, shiny dough. I'll try to get all the chunks off my hand, you know. Nobody likes hand pasta. As you can see, it's slowly coming together here. May need to add a little bit of moisture to this. Just a touch of water to help it come together. And don't be afraid, you know, if you're making pasta at home and your dough feels like it's a little sticky, or maybe that it's a little dry, like in this case, it's okay to add a little bit of moisture or a little bit extra flour to it. The important thing here is that we have the right texture of the dough. But keep in mind, a little bit of water goes a long way with pasta, so you shouldn't add a lot. I probably just added about a teaspoon, and that's probably going to be more than enough. Just keep working it. There we go. You can see it's starting to really firm up and becoming a nice dough. Fresh pasta, until I had tried it when I was in my early 20s, I never really thought there was a big difference. I was like, well, I mean, the stuff that's dried was fresh at one point, right? But there's a big misconception there, because the dry pasta you get typically doesn't contain nearly as much egg, and because it's sat and been allowed to dry, it never gets quite as tender as a nice homemade pasta. All right. So it's pretty much there. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to get my plastic wrap. I'm going to wrap it up tight. That way it does not dry out. But I'm going to allow it to sit, to relax a little bit, and to allow it to completely rehydrate all of the flour. Whenever I do this and wrap it up, I always try to get out as much of the air as I can, because I don't like those little edges that are very dry and crusty. There we go. So while our pasta dough is resting, which like I was saying, it needs to rest for about 30 minutes, our next step is going to be to make our sauce. And the sauce we're going to be cooking with this pasta today is going to be a Parmesan cream sauce. And what we're going to start off with is a little bit of white onion and garlic. Okay? And we want to cook this over medium-low heat. Okay? We want our garlic and our onions to cook, but we really don't want to get any color on them. Since it's a cream sauce, it should be white. If we get any color, it'll just show up in the sauce later on. How you cut the onions and garlic, it doesn't have to be the prettiest, because we're going to puree this up afterwards. And I got some beautiful garlic today from the farmer's market. It's a nice purple-hearted garlic. And all I'm going to do is I put my knife, I separated the garlic cloves, I put my knife on the back, and I just kind of rock on it a little bit to break up the husk. Okay? Get it out of its skin. Some people like to, smack the garlic down kind of hard. Just like with all things in life. Whatever works for you, and whatever tastes good. That's what's most important. Actually, the pan's a little hot, so I'm going to turn it down. Because again, I just want to cook the onions and the garlic. I don't want to get any color on them. Professional chefs normally get peeled garlic. I don't peel it very often, I'll be honest. Maybe at home when my wife makes me, but that's about it. All right, like I said, I'm just going to thinly slice the garlic. It doesn't have to be in any particular shape. And add it to my onions. This sauce actually is, when you're making a sauce, there's so many different ways to thicken a sauce. You can use a thickening agent, such as like a roux or cornstarch. This sauce doesn't actually have any thickening agent. It actually uses all of the vegetables that's in it, as well as cheese to thicken it. That way it gets a lovely velvety texture, but there's no, added anything you don't want or need. Grab the rest of my ingredients. One important thing, whenever you're cooking things like onions or mushrooms that have a lot of water in them, you want to season early on, okay, with salt. What that salt is going to do is it's going to help them to break down and to release those liquids. That way, they get out early and you can get them cooked and done with quick. Like always, make sure whenever you're getting cookware, you can buy a pot for $10 from the farmer's market. Is it going to cook as well as the $30 or $40 pot? Probably not. And one of the big reasons why is the more expensive pots are typically a little heavier duty. They have thicker bottoms. They'll have multiple layers built into those bottoms. And what that's going to do is it's going to help to transfer heat evenly. That way, there's not one hot spot. It doesn't burn someplace. It doesn't get really hot really quick, too fast. All right, my onions are starting to turn translucent. So the next step, I'm going to add my wine. As well as my water. Now, typically, when you add wine to, after you've sautéed some vegetables, what you're trying to do is to deglaze the pan, which means that all the little crispy stuff in the bottom you want to pick up and really get into your sauce. In this situation, I don't have that issue because I haven't cooked the vegetables at a high enough temperature to really create all that, what they call fond, okay, F-O-N-D. That's the stuff that sticks to the bottom, and it's typically very well caramelized and has a ton of flavor, but it's hard to get off the bottom. Now, while these are sautéing, I'm going to go one step further, and I'm going to cut up my mushrooms for later. Okay, these are going to be going in the final part of the dish. Now, these mushrooms, these are portobellos. One thing to know about portobello mushrooms, they're very meaty. They have kind of a thick skin on top that you can literally just peel up from the edge, and you're going to want to do that because that skin is pretty tough and it doesn't ever really cook down very well. So as you can see, all I'm doing is just lightly peeling it from the bottom up. You don't have to do this, but it's one of those little things that chefs do to make sure that the mushrooms are nice and tender and you don't get a big old chunk of skin. The water and the wine have reduced down a bit. So what I'm going to do now is to add my heavy cream to my sauce. As well as I'm going to add my cheese and my thyme to my sauce. I'm just going to let that melt in. Now one thing to be very cautious of when you're using Parmesan cheese like this is because it's been a dried cheese, it's very, very heavily salted, okay? So you wouldn't want to put too much salt in the beginning, add your cheese at the end, and then realize, oh shoot, my salt is too salty. And I'm just gonna let this hang out, come up to a simmer while I'm peeling my mushrooms. One other thing you'll notice with Portobello mushrooms, they have very dark gills, as you can see in the bottom there. And those gills tend to come off into whatever you're cooking. They don't taste bad, you know, they just kind of taste like mushrooms, but they'll make any dish you cook look really messy. And so we're gonna remove those as well once we're done peeling. Now, when it comes to mushrooms, I always have people ask me, oh, should you wash mushrooms? And the answer is no. It's a resounding no. Mushrooms are grown, you know, in earthy, you know, conditions. But all you really need to do when it comes to a mushroom is to brush it off with a kitchen towel if they're a little dirty. The reason being is mushrooms act like sponges and they will soak up all of the water you put on them, and they just, you know, they won't ever get nice and caramelized. You can also, when you're cleaning the gills like this, you can also do it with a spoon. Works really well. I just don't happen to have one right here. Also, if you do get a mushroom that has a stem on it, you want to take it off for sure because those are very woody. My liquid here is almost coming up to a boil now. Now what I'm trying to accomplish here is I want to melt the cheese just a bit, okay? And man, if you could smell this, it smells amazing. The smell of thyme and garlic coming through. And it looks like most of my cheese has already been melted down. So what I'm going to do now in just a second here is actually take that to my blender and make it a nice smooth cream sauce. These mushrooms, I don't want to cut them up too much, you know, because they're nice and meaty, so I really just want to give them a little rough chop, cut them into quarters. Now, warning for those of you trying this at home. When you put something hot into the blender, if you don't go slow, you will be wearing it, I promise. I have worn plenty sauces, plenty of purees, plenty of everything I have worn. It's why it's really nice if you can find a blender with a variable speed on it, which, you know, just means you can set it to whatever speed you like. They're the best because you can start off very slow and you'll work your way up to the speed you want. This is a Vitamix. This is like the king of blenders here. But I'm going to start it off on the lowest speed it's got and then slowly increase. Check our sauce. One other thing to keep in mind too is, you would say, well, why can't we just cool the sauce down before we puree it? The issue with that is once the cream gets cold, if you put it in the blender, you'll turn it into whipped cream. Again, I only speak from personal experience here of having done that before, which really stinks when you get all the way to almost finishing something and then you have to restart. Smells delicious. And again, you probably saw, I wanted to add the cheese and the thyme towards the end of the sauce. That way, the thyme flavor came through really nice. All right. Let's see, so it's been just about 30 minutes now with our pasta dough. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get the water for the pasta started, start getting it hot, and then we'll come back and roll out our pasta. Now, if you've ever heard a chef talking about making pasta water, they'll all say the same thing, right? Your pasta water has to be salted, okay? And more specifically, they'll tell you to make sure that the pasta water tastes like the ocean. You want that, you notice when we made our pasta dough, we didn't put any salt in it at all whatsoever, okay? And salt is what really enhances flavor. Well, the pasta water being very salty is going to be what helps the pasta dough actually suck up flavor. As you can see here, pasta dough looks pretty lovely. See the color on it, it's a very, very deep yellow, almost like a gold color. And that's because we had those egg yolks that were so rich. Okay. Now comes the fun part. Now this part you can do by hand, but if you've never made pasta, I don't suggest it. And that's going to be the actual rolling of the dough. So what I'm going to do here, this pasta dough is pretty dry, so I should be able to roll it out without a bunch of extra flour. But if you get to your pasta dough and it feels kind of sticky when you pull it out, make sure that you put liberal amounts of flour on it as you're running it through your roller, because that'll help stop it from from sticking or tearing, which is really a pain in the butt when you get to the end and now you can't even make what you work so hard for. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to flatten out my dough so that it'll run through what they call the pasta sheeter, the pasta press. And I'm going to set this press. There's a dial on the side, okay? Now this dial goes from number 1 all the way up to 8, or maybe slightly different depending on what year, what model of pasta roller you have. But 8 is going to be the finest, while 1 is the largest. All right. So what we're going to do is successively get it thinner. You know, run it through multiple times until it gets thin and very shiny. I'll run it through a few times when I first start just to get the right shape, so that way when it runs through later it'll be nice and even. I'm going to take it down to 2 now, roll it out a little thinner. I'll go back and forth a little bit, especially early on. So I went from 1 to 2, 2 to 3. Now I'm going to fold it over into a nice shape, and I'm going to go back up to 2 to roll it through. You can see that we have a lovely smooth pasta dough here that's all a nice homogeneous color. It's very smooth and silky to the touch. So now we're where we want to be. So now I'm going to cut the noodles. Well, I need to roll it out thinner. I normally roll my pasta out to about a 6 on here, which is not quite the thinnest. I don't like to go much thinner than that because if you go too thin, your pasta will tend to shred a little bit. You really only go thinner when you're making raviolis because when you double over the dough, it can get a little thick. Now, as you can see, we have this nice long sheet of dough that, before and after. It looks a little, this one looks a little kind of, a little rough, it's not quite a nice homogeneous color, but after you roll it through a few times, it comes out beautiful. Now, what we're going to do, I always typically trim off the very ends, okay? And how long do you want your pasta noodles? This is one of the great things is you can really cut them into any shape, any thickness, however you want. Now, personally, I like a nice long pasta noodle because I like to twirl it up in my fork until my fork looks like I'm the Statue of Liberty. So I'm going to cut this just into 2 pieces. But again, you can do it however you want. And the shape we're going to cut today are called pappardelle. Pappardelle is a pretty thick pasta. Okay, I'm going to trim off the ends just so I have a nice uniform look. You don't have to, it's just that's things we do in the restaurant to make sure that things are nice. And then I'm going to cut these about 3/4 of an inch thick. Okay. And there you have it. Some lovely Pappardelle noodles. I'm going to roll out some of these other ones here so I can, I'll probably get about 3 orders out of one ball of dough. But this is going to be just lovely here shortly. See, the first time I slowed down a little bit to show you guys. I'm going to show you in real speed how we do this. What was my time on that one? Was that pretty good time? As you can tell, I've made a good bit of pasta in my life. All right, same thing. Cut these in half. And the perfect news is my pasta water is just about boiling. Now, something great about fresh pasta is since it doesn't have to, you're not rehydrating a dry noodle, it actually cooks a lot quicker. Normally on the order of about 3 minutes. And it just, when it's done because it floats. But yeah, it cooks much quicker than dry pasta. Now you probably have seen people, they want to hang their pasta on a tree, those like a tree with all those wooden dowels. Personally, I find that to be a little unnecessary. What I like to do when I make large batches of fresh pasta is I make a bird's nest. So however large I want to portion it, I'll form it up into a small bird's nest, right? And I can put a little bit of cornmeal down on or fine ground cornmeal down, and I set it on top of it in the fridge just like that, and you allow it to dry. You can come back, the next day, flip it over. That way the bottom dries evenly as well. And that way you can actually store your fresh pasta for a little while longer. It's still going to be just as tender because it hasn't, it's not really thick like the store-bought pasta. But it's just a good way to help save it. And you know exactly how many, if you're cooking for 3, you know exactly how many orders you got. Water's boiling now, so I'm going to go ahead and drop this pasta in. These ones will be my dinner for later tonight. You don't want to mess with your pasta in the pot too much because it can be very tender at that point. Best thing to do is just move it around enough so you know it's not sticking, and that's it. And then just leave it alone. Getting my pan ready for the next step of our journey. So you can see those beautiful golden noodles. They're a little lighter colored now that they've been rolled out and everything, but all right, that's all she wrote for the pasta noodles. We'll let those drain for just a second, and we're going to finish our dish here. I need to grab a touch of olive oil for my mushrooms as well as my pasta. And what we're going to do now to finish everything is we're going to saute some mushrooms as well as a little bit of spinach and toss it with the Parmesan cream. And we want to get this pan nice and hot because we want to get nice caramelization on those mushrooms. And the only way you're going to do that is when your pan is hot. Really what you look for is when you put the oil in, you want it to shimmer a little bit on top. And also just a little bit of smoking on the oil is great. And if you put your food in and it doesn't really make a good sizzle, just hold up another 30-45 seconds. There's no reason to rush it once you get to the end of the line. All my mushrooms in here. Going to add salt and a little bit of pepper, and I always use fresh ground cracked black pepper. The reason being is, yeah, you can buy the little containers that have the pepper already ground in it, but how do you know when that pepper was ground? How much of the essential oils are still in that pepper, or are you just really getting like black specks in your food? I want to taste the pepper. So I always use a nice coarse ground fresh black pepper. I mean, you can when it hits the oil, you can just smell it. That's when you know you've got good pepper. And the thing is salt and pepper balance each other. So salt enhances flavor. Okay, so these mushrooms might not taste as mushroomy without the salt, whereas pepper is an agitator. It actually agitates your taste buds, which makes them a little more, I guess the best way I can put it, awake. And that's what really makes food stand out. So that's why they work in harmony. Okay, I just want a little bit of color on these mushrooms, a little golden brown. And I like, when I'm doing things like sauteing nice chunks of mushroom, I always want to make sure I flip each one individually, because if I just do the cool pan shaking thing and flip it in the pan like I know how to do, with something like this, what if one of those mushrooms still lands on the same side, and instead of getting golden brown, it gets burnt on one side and it's still raw on the other? I mean, what's the point of that? Oh, these mushrooms smell lovely. What I'm going to do now, while my pan is nice and screaming hot, I'm going to add my spinach. Keep in mind, when you think you have enough spinach, you never do. And with spinach as well, you really want a nice hot pan, because otherwise it's just going to turn into a soupy mess. Now I'm going to add just a touch of my sauce. And my pasta. And remember, you always, whenever you're cooking pasta, you always want to cook your pasta what's known as al dente. And what that means in Italian is to the tooth. The reason for that is if you cook your pasta all the way, all you can do is toss it in the sauce. You can't really cook it in the sauce, so the pasta doesn't get the chance to absorb the flavor. So when you cook it al dente, you can cook it in the sauce for another minute or so, and it really absorbs that flavor. And something important I also forgot to mention earlier is when you are cooking the pasta, whether it be dry or fresh, don't wash it when it comes out. I have people all the time that they say, oh, you got to rinse your pasta off after it comes out of the water. And that's the worst thing you can do, because what's on the outside of the pasta noodles is starch, okay? And that starch is going to allow the pasta to really absorb and hold on to those sauces for you, all right? And now, all that's left is to plate our pasta. So, you know, one way a lot of people like to do it is with a tuning fork, or not a tuning fork, a carving fork. Because this is pappardelle, however you want to do it is going to be fine, because it's not going to hold a nice tight shape like some others. Get some of the mushrooms on there. Got some of the lovely color from the spinach. And then I have a little bit more of the grana padano Parmesan cheese, and what I did was I used a peeler and actually peeled it and made some nice shavings. And what these will do is they'll kind of melt into the dish when you mix them in, but they add a nice visual effect. You could also use a grater. That works as well. So that's it. You know, fresh homemade pappardelle with portobello mushrooms, spinach, and a Parmesan cream sauce. You watched me do it. It didn't require some crazy amount of expertise, any crazy equipment that you couldn't have at home, and it didn't require a whole lot of time. I mean, yeah, I do this for a living, so it was a little quicker and easier for me, but it just goes to show you can do it at home too and really, really impress your family. You know, it's always about the little things, you know, making sure that you've got a good meaty mushroom, you know, making sure that you've got the nice egg yolks that are going to give you a nice, beautiful, brilliant yellow pasta. Like you'll always hear from me. It's the little things that count in the long run. So, once again, thank you for joining me with Cooking with Chef Jeff. That is here at the Gwinnett County Public Library, the Five Forks Trickham branch. And this is actually a GCPL culinary series. And I can't wait to have you back with me next time. So I will see you soon.